turning the page on 4 long years of corruption, weaponization, and surrender to violent criminals, and we're restoring fair, equal, and impartial justice under the constitutional rule of law. There could be no more heinous betrayal of American values than to use the law to terrorize the innocent and reward the wicked. And it's exactly what you saw with Joe Biden, Merrick Garland, and their cronies to do the building of the last 4 years. They imported illegal alien murderers, drug dealers, and child predators from all over the world to come into our country while putting elderly Christians and pro-life activists on trial for singing hymns and for saying prayers. We will restore the scales of justice in America, and we will ensure that such abuses never happen again in our country.
You guys, I love that Donald Trump took this moment to remind everybody of what he went through. Before he even stepped into the White House, they were starting that spying investigation. And when he said, they're spying on me, Obama's spying on me, the entire left-wing media came out and said he's paranoid, he's crazy. Everything he said that was happening to him happened. Yeah. And he went all the way through it, all the way down to, you know, the FBI going through his wife's underwear drawers. This thing was crazy. It was egregious. And it's really remarkable, not just that he made it through and is president again, but he's putting the two people who know more about that, what they were up to, Kash Patel and Dan Bongino at the FBI. This is a remarkable moment. We really have to take that in. Dan Bongino wrote the book on all the things that they were doing inside of the DOJ and the FBI to basically, as Donald Trump said, turn us into a third world country. The things that happen to us are the things that happen in like the most dysfunctional countries in Latin America. And it happened here. Yeah, it's kind of like the meme that we've seen on social media. It says, I can't call myself a conspiracy theorist anymore because they're all coming true. I'm all out of conspiracies to theorize. It's all just true now. I always say, Joey, they're spoiler alerts. They're not conspiracy theorists. Well, when it comes to the DOJ, President Trump and his cabinet have a list of priorities. They want to end weaponization, border security, restoring death penalty, and then October 7th, task force, and, of course, DEI terminations. Obviously, these hit specific places in the DOJ they feel like are going awry or in the wrong direction or overlooked and ignored. But really, when you think about what they're doing, they're not making the DOJ friendly to conservatives. They're really setting it up to be the objective. And this is all of government. This really goes into Elon Musk and what he's doing. The idea that government stops working on individuals' personal agenda or some group's deep state agenda, and that government goes off the direction of the executive and the will of the people. You know, Charlie, I saw that list, and I see they had that October 7th task force. How about a January 6th task force?
Yeah, there are a lot of unanswered questions about it.
Sure are. Well, let's get to the bottom of that.
A lot of things that are curious. You know, it's interesting, of course, the founders, you know, they grappled with this whole idea of having a Department of Justice, and they even talked about the idea of having an elected attorney general, and ended up deciding that the best way to move forward was to have a Department of Justice that worked for the executive branch, that worked for the president. And you had to rely on the American people electing somebody who would not use that Department of Justice to go after political enemies. Yeah. And it was kind of it's a trust thing, and it's like it's the best bad solution in our system. But it's you know, a system of men. That's what you're going to wind up with. And you know, by and large, we've been pretty lucky with this until Barack Obama came along and decided to and perhaps maybe there are examples earlier in his administration, but in 2015 when he launched at the highest levels of the Obama administration an investigation into his political opponent, to his party's most significant political opponent, and began spying on his political opponent, all bets are off. The whole idea of trusting the Department of Justice went out the window, and I think Donald Trump is committed to restoring that trust. I remember Barack Obama saying he was going to fundamentally change America, and you're right, Charlie. At that moment, he fundamentally changed America. Another spoiler alert. I'm going to fundamentally change America. We should have taken him at his word. When they say what they're going to do, believe them, right? Yeah. When they tell you who they are. Yeah, exactly. Trust them. President Trump making his first visit to the Department of Justice this term, vowing to reverse the damage done by the Biden administration. This while revealing plans to purge the DOJ of all corruption.
They tried to turn America into a corrupt, communist, and third world country. But in the end, the thugs failed and the truth won. Freedom won, justice won, democracy won, and above all, the American people won. There could be no more heinous betrayal of American values than to use the law to terrorize the innocent and reward the wicked.
Joining us now to weigh in is counselor to the president, Trump, Alina Habba. Great to see you this morning, Alina. So tell us, why was it so important for President Trump to make that visit yesterday to the Department of Justice?
Well, for 4 years, President Trump has been the victim of relentless prosecution by that exact same DOJ. So to see the president standing there, to see his picture over the door as Pam Bondi walked with him was truly surreal, especially for myself watching it, because we've spent the last 4 years, better or worse, in court systems that were weaponized by that exact building. Not just that building, by the way, also the White House in the last administration. So it was a very important message. It was something that was very meaningful to him, to the American people. We no longer want a justice system off taxpayer dollars that hits people that they can't fight fair and square because of their political sides, because of their views on their own children in schools, things of that nature. And President Trump is vowing to correct and restore faith in the Justice Department.
Yeah, I was struck by that too, and interested by the people who are also in the audience who are now part of the administration. And I was also struck a week or so ago when President Trump had his first cabinet meeting, and standing along the edges of the room was Peter Navarro, who 6 months ago was sitting in prison for trumped-up political charges. Yeah. And now he is out, and he is part of the solution to fix the weaponization.
That's correct. Everybody, look, I'm there, and it's amazing because we had such a hard run for 4 years, but I do believe God works in mysterious ways. The reason President Trump is in now, I really believe this, the reason President Trump is in there now, he is not in jail where they tried to put him, for no crime other than loving the country. But the reason we are in now is we have perspective. We have to restore. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but we have perspective on just how corrupt the last administration was. And that's a beautiful image of Pam and the president walking in there. Pam's doing a tremendous job, the president by her side. We are going to fix this. We are not going to allow anybody to do this to any Americans again. They have to spend the money the right way. Taxpayers didn't ask for this. We're not a third world country. We're America. We have a constitution, we have laws, and we have to follow them.
Well, you are right. God does work in mysterious ways, and he chooses who he wishes to choose to fight his battles for him, and it's pretty extraordinary. Alina Habba, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.